Dowry? Whiskey? Ah, Dowry! You could never unlock my secret. Oh no! Suddenly, don't leave me! Let's begin. Indeed.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Honey Badger Radio. My name is Brian, and this is the Fireside Chat, where we talk with, let's say, interesting people that are sort of in and around our wheelhouse, the things that we discuss. And today I'm joined by, this is Shah. Well, at least that's the name of your channel. That's not your name, unless your name is Shah, which I should have
Shah.
asked you.
I go
It's
by Shah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, dude, thanks so much for coming on. Welcome to the show. Really appreciate you having, taking the time.
Yeah, no worries. It's great to be on. So I'm hoping we'll have a fun discussion here. Got a lot to talk about, I'd say.
Yeah, definitely a lot to talk about. So, I want to give people a little bit of a background on how I found your content. And you came recommended partly by another guy who was on the channel. It's Complicated, mentioned you, but before that, I saw you on a talk with Paul Elam. You'd done a couple of shows with him discussing Dowry and the history of that. So tell us a little bit about your background and what it is that you do and how you found yourself getting involved with this kind of content.
Yeah. Well, my background was I actually used to work at a child support agency. So I did that for 5 years. And, it kind of the whole gamut, I guess, of what you'd imagine with child support, the genetic tests and calculating people's child support, meeting with the parents, going to court, the enforcement of child support. I've trained other child support, child support agents. We would call them child support officers. This was all in California, so I was very familiar with that. I've spoke with many moms and dads and seen kind of how the system worked, not just with the parents, but also on the back end with the welfare system and all these kinds of things, and just saw all that stuff come together. And I never really had any idea or never really thought about that aspect so much. Prior to that, I did see some sort of manosphere stuff. Like I used to read, on the subreddit, the Red Pill subreddit back then. So that was about the time I kind of discovered that. And then that was just after college. And then not too long after, I started working at the agency. And I started seeing these things come together, especially when it came to families falling apart. Not so much just about people having struggles with dating or, stuff that I would have been concerned with just as a young guy. But then I started seeing, divorce judgments and all that kind of stuff. So it just, seeing that in front of me for so long, it just got me really interested in the history of all that and kind of how we ended up with the system that we ended up. Because I used to think, well, if we just change the laws or something like that, everything should be fixed. And then it's like, well, how did we get the laws that we have? Okay, well, this is the culture we come from and just all these different changes. So it set me down a pretty big rabbit hole.
Yeah, yeah. So, okay, well, out of curiosity, what got you involved just before all the red pill stuff happened? Why did you get involved with child support stuff? Was it just like, oh, I just need a job and this, helps me put food on the table, or were you particularly interested in this?
To be honest, it was a fluke. It was so my buddy and I, we'd graduated college and he came back into town, and him and I, we were hanging out together because we were trying to figure out, like, to find some employment somewhere. I was selling beds and stuff like that. Just I had made this small business in college and I was doing that. And so we were kind of supporting each other. And my friend, he actually found the job posting, and I'd never heard of child support, really. I didn't know what it was. I was like, oh, it's something that helps kids, I guess, So we
Yeah.
both and we took the preliminary test that they were doing, so that as part of the application, and him and I both applied, and I ended up getting the job. So I thought I was never going to hear back from them, and like 6 months later they sent me a criminal history disclosure form, and I was like, oh, I almost missed seeing that in the mail, and I filled it back out. And then before you know it, I was working there, And then as
Whoa.
I was working there, I was like, oh, this is what it is. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
I just could have never imagined just how complex and how many layers to that system there was. I thought it was something way different.
Yeah. So like in broad strokes, because I'm actually interested in this because family courts and broken families are like a big thing that I advocate to address, on this
Mm,
channel. It's one of my central focuses. So as someone who worked or works, I assume you still do in the in this field, like what are
mhm.
some of the things, like first of all, what is it generally, and also what are some things that people may not know about child support that they should know?
Gosh, well, I mean, typically child support is there when, a family breaks up, or if there was really never a family established in the first place, to be frank. I mean, there's a lot of out of wedlock births and things like that.
Yeah.
You can say families no longer cohabitating if you don't want to discuss marriage in that way. But when that happens, there is usually an obligation from one parent to the other to pay a monetary amount, and that's based off of factors like custody and income. And the things that surprised me, and this surprised most people, because most people I would meet up with, or not meet up with, but that would come into the agency and be sitting across the table from me, they'd say, "Hey, why do I have to pay child support? We have 50-50 custody," or something like that. It doesn't make sense. Then I'd have to explain the laws and the calculator and say, well, whoever the higher earner is has to pay into the lesser earner. And, it's written in the family code that, um, especially how it was explained to us that they're trying to kind of even out the lifestyles there for the kid as they go back and forth.
Mm.
Or things like paternity laws. One of the things that really surprised me was in California, if paternity is established, especially when the kid's born, and typically through marriage, there's a presumption of paternity, so there's no need for an extra kind of per, parental establishment sort of mechanism. It just happens from the marriage itself as the child's issued forth within the marriage. That once the child turns 2, you can't, you're the parent, you know what I mean? And you can't challenge that. You can't, they're not going to undo it because they're going to say it's going to cause psychological harm to the child. So, I'd see a lot of people getting divorced, maybe the kid's 3 or 4 now. And then suddenly, whatever comes out of that blow up, hey, I cheated on you, or I don't think the kid's mine, or something like that. Then they got to get that kind of spilled to them. And some of them would do a private genetic test and find that out, and then, or she'd go back to live with their ex-boyfriend who actually fathered the child or something like that, and he's still paying. Like, I saw all these wacky things, and
Yeah.
there's all these things about the system that people aren't aware of or they don't think about. And also 65% of our cases were started because of welfare. So typically
Oh.
somebody would go sign up for welfare, a cash grant for, them and the child, and then when they saw that one or the other parent wasn't in the home, we would get a request from their office to say, hey, go get the money back. Because when they sign up for welfare, they're signing over child support rights to the state. So we were trying to recoup a lot of these tax dollars going out. And and then there was all kinds of welfare fraud. That's a different kind of thing. I used to call that spillage. And then on the back end, there's matching funds for child support based off how it's collected. So there's these different performance measures. There's these different sort of family law aspects that were set up in order to try to establish paternity for kids born out of wedlock. And then you had this kind of interfacing of this original family law that we had for a long time, especially before genetic tests, that would find different ways to say someone is the father, based off of holding out to be the father, things that weren't genetic in nature. Then you have this other thing here, which is now we have the modern science, and it kind of seems to come together in a way that is really tough on fathers, in my opinion. So
Yeah.
there's a lot going on there.
Yeah. Yeah. Um. Yeah. Well. Okay. So that sounds like a lot of red tape for and it seems like it just comes out of, maybe there's just something wrong with like marriage right now, and that's what so like and families, just like forming them. So then
Yeah.
how did you go from doing this child support stuff, which kind of got you into the red pill stuff, to then looking at the dowries and the history of that?
Yeah, so for a long time, I had been studying, even after having worked at child support. I mean, we did learn about the history there and the family codes, but it didn't go that far back. And I was very much interested in the history of these laws. So I kind of just kept digging back. And it's like, okay, no fault, and then to at fault, and what came before that. And, there's this huge cultural conversation going on about what marriage is really supposed to be or what it really was, quote unquote. And I was interested in child support laws, and I kept going back and back and back and back. And I got all the way back to like Hammurabi's code, and in there I can't remember the line. Is this line about, what kind of happens to the produce of the farm or whatever if the couple divorced but they had children, and where that would go. And I'm getting a little kick out of that, like, hey, look, it's the world's oldest child support law or something like that. And then, but in Hammurabi's code also, bride price and dowry are both mentioned, and it's
Yeah.
discussed, what happens to those in the event of splitting up, or just rules around that. And that wasn't the first ping I got in my mind about that, but that was like the recent one. So as I was looking for child support, it kind of, and looking at the history of child support, it took me back to that. Then I finally decided, I was like, I've seen this a couple times just in my life. And I thought, maybe I should really do a comprehensive study of this. And that's when I started digging into academic journals and just trying to find anything I could find to learn about the system. Prior to that, I'd say in my early 20s, I was reading a lot of books, and one of the books I was reading some Dostoevsky, and he wrote a book called Brothers Karamazov, and he also wrote The Idiot.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because in these books, a lot of the discussions about the characters, kind of involve their marriages or their marriage prospects, and there's this discussion about the dowry. And as I'm reading this, I can see how the characters are weighing their options based off different dowry amounts and the different motivations that the characters have. And when I had first read that book, I thought it was weird. I was like, oh, that's weird. So the woman's side, I just thought it was weird that the woman was bringing money, because I had always thought it's the man who brings the money. So that was like my first ping. And then it kind of just existed back there for a bit. And then as I was digging into child support and family law and how we kind of got the system we ended up with, I just ran into that basically. And then as when I saw that and I started reading more and more about it, especially the anthropology about it, it just kind of blew my mind.
Yeah. Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about like, we look at the divorce rates and all these issues with, like child support and paternity fraud and false paternity and all this other stuff. And just how like cutthroat it gets, when
Mhm.
divorce comes around. I mean, I've heard my parents stayed together, but I heard horror stories about friends and even my wife, but and it got me thinking like something about this is just wrong, and I think that it's been wrong for a long time. So first of all, someone in the chat is asking me, so I'm going to do this because we're going to move on
Oh yeah,
into
no
dowry
problem.
stuff. But someone is asking, what is the craziest situation you've ever seen with child support, doing the child support thing?
I mean, I've seen some very large amounts. I've seen some very weird divorce judgments. The one I always remember, and I've shared this in some other places, but the one that was like both my coworker and I just had to like take a break for a second was, I kind of touched on it earlier, but my coworker who sat next to me, he was on a phone call, and he was on our advanced collections team. So when people really didn't want to pay, we had a special team in the office that would try to go in there and get this money, and with whatever enforcement tactics they had. Um, and he was on a pretty tough phone call. And when he got off the phone call, he walked over to come he just had to talk to somebody, I guess. But I was hearing him on the phone. And he's like, he was just like, I don't know what I would do if I was that guy. And I was like, what's going on, man? Like, what happened? And he was explaining to me that this guy was married, and he had, I think it was 2 kids with somebody. And then they had gotten divorced, and he had to pay child support. And what ended up happening, though, according to this guy, is that she went to go live with her ex-boyfriend with the kids too. And according to him, those kids are, were from his own private test or whatever. It's actually not his kids, and they were the kids of that boyfriend. So he couldn't stomach it. I don't think most guys could, having to have his labor slaved over to that household and pay every month to go pay into a household of for that's their family and it's not even his kids, and he just couldn't
And
take it.
was that ruling was made with that knowledge, or was it that, like, did the judge or
Th-
whoever passed the ruling, they were like, I know these aren't your kids, but you're paying for them anyway? Like,
that that's essentially what happened, just because of how the law works here and when they got divorced. I don't know if the judge took that into account, but even if he did, presumption of paternity was already there. You know what I mean? So
yeah,
since the kids were issued within the marriage, and the kids were above 2 at the time of the divorce, even though he wasn't the father, he still had a legal obligation to fulfill as the legal father of those kids. And we just live in such a weird system where it's like she can get away with doing that, and the custody to him at that point probably wasn't worth fighting for, especially if they weren't his kids. And we knew that, and everybody, pretty much knew that, but there's unless you can, like, maybe somehow facilitate an adoption, and like that other guy and everybody would be willing to do that, there's no way out of it for that guy. So he refused to pay. And refusing to pay is another problem, because you can't bankrupt that debt. Interest is going to keep growing on it. Child support has like the strongest enforcement actions, right up there with the IRS. It was modeled off of the IRS system when it was pitched to
wow,
Congress to vamp up child support in the mid 90s. So, no license, not able to renew your passport, bank account levies, business licenses, fishing licenses, all that stuff revoked, gambling winnings intercepted, tax returns intercepted, liens put on houses, liens put on your parents' houses if we think you're going to inherit it. I mean, the list goes on of stuff that we would do. So that's one thing that always stood out to me. Other than that, it was just seeing, a lot of divorces. I've seen a lot of guys kind of take the tradcon deal, so to speak. At least that's what I call it. And then just kind of end up,
what's
with high
that on
spousal, high
deal?
child support. Just in the sense of like being the sole provider and
Yeah,
having to stay at home mom. And I know a lot of people might, especially conservatives, and I get it. It definitely is strange or feels strange to them, but reading so many divorce orders, I had come to the conclusion, if I was ever going to sign based off of the laws that we have, that I would do it with someone with a similar income with me, or at least putting something significant into the marriage. Because of all the divorces I saw, the ones where they seem to make around the same amount seem to be the most amiable. Go figure. And typically what would happen is they would just waive spousal support, both of them, and they would figure out custody, as best they can. And one person might
yeah.
have to pay a smaller amount of child support depending on what the custody arrangement was going to be. But it just makes it a lot easier. It was either that or don't have the marriage license involved at all. Then you're going to have to still pay a significant amount of child support, but at least you're not also paying spousal support and going through these other things.
Right. Yeah, yeah. No, I think you're right about that.
Yeah.
I believe that the tradcons, I guess as we call them today, they think they're living in a world that, or they're creating a world that existed, but I think that what they're living in is still modernity in a lot of ways. Like, it's a recent invention, which is
Yeah.
why I wanted to talk to you about the dowry stuff. Um, so like, when people think of the term dowry, if
Hmm.
they are aware of it, they usually associate it with, like countries like India, where
Yeah.
it still goes on. And of
Hmm.
course, there's a lot of issues with that. Even there was a documentary
Yeah.
made about, the problems with the dowries in India. But this is not like really exclusive to those parts of the world. So could you, just for the people watching, explain what dowry is, and like how it differs from the current system?
Sure. Yeah. And most of my research has focused on Western history, and I specifically did that on purpose.
Hmm.
Because when we do think of dowry, we think of these faraway places from cultures that are different from us. But the most surprising thing for me was how pervasive and how prevalent dowry was in European and Western history altogether. But dowry specifically, and this is as opposed to bride wealth. So this is a book,
Bride, wealth, and dowry. Yeah.
Bride, Wealth, and Dowry by Jack Goody and S.J. Tambia. Jack Goody was an Oxford anthropologist, and dowry very specific. So bride price, dowry, these are housed under the umbrella term of marriage transaction. Okay,
Marriage
so a
transaction.
marriage, yeah, so a marriage transaction is a transfer of, you can say, wealth, goods, property, cash at the time of marriage. So basically, there is a property transmission, a property transfer event, a wealth transfer at the time of marriage. And for most of human history, uh, most marriages had some kind of wealth transfer. Okay. Now, a dowry, very specifically, is a wealth transfer from the bride's parents to the bride. So she becomes endowed with what is essentially an inheritance. Except, you might hear, okay, sons used to inherit. And then sons got the inheritance and daughters didn't. But daughters did get an inheritance, and that's what the dowry was. So they would get their portion of the family fund at the time of marriage, and then this would be, dowered upon them, I guess you can say, endowed. And then when they got married, that would go with them to form the new household with their husband. Okay, so it is a very real material amount of wealth.
Right.
Okay.
It was like a business merger then, or something, like forming if you or is that like too crude to call a marriage like a business
it's
thing,
to create
like
a new conjugal estate or conjugal fund. I mean, because when you think about it, this new couple forming will need something to get them started. But I mean, there's a bargain there. There's a marriage bargain. You can call it a business kind of thing. I think the issue with that is what really ends up happening to this whole system if something called the love match comes and unseats it. You know what I mean? Especially as labor value between the sexes start to change, and we can get into that. But there is a negotiation, and typically what you would see happen is that the size of the endowment to the daughter or the dowry would typically match either the son's potential, the potential groom's potential income, and then also his inheritance or bequest from his parents down the line. So in the marriage contract and in the negotiation, you see a positive assertive matching, and there's a balance there between what she's coming with now and what he's pretty much expected to get. So this helps set up the new household, and it helps set him up to then be, the person that's out there providing and all these kinds of things. And dowries were no joke. I mean, families worked together to save the dowries for their daughters. And in a lot of places, Italy, France, even England, Germany, Cyprus, Greece, a typical dowry would be a house from the wife's side, provided, by them. And this is like middle class stuff right here. As you go from top to bottom, so another myth you might hear is that it was just wealthy people, just royalty or something who did this. That's another thing that I discovered isn't true. It's everybody from top to bottom. And if you don't have a dowry, well, then you didn't get married. I don't know if I can share my screen, but it's like I have newspaper articles of the Pope giving out dowries in the 1800s so that women who couldn't get married can then get husbands or use it to join a convent, which is typically a little cheaper than the entry into marriage. And
I won't be able to share screens right now because I don't have it set up for that. But
that's no problem. That's no problem. I can just.
That's right. I trust that it's real. You can give me the links and I'll put them in the description and people can look at it.
But yeah. Anyway, so that's no problem. But so it is from top to bottom. So that's the dowry. The other thing is the bride price, which anthropologists renamed bride wealth, because bride price carried this connotation of buying and selling, which once anthropologists really looked at this, that's not the case. And so a bride price, that's what you'd see in like the Old Testament, like the mohar, basically. And when you read in the Old Testament about some of the marriage transactions there, that's what you see typically. And that is a transfer from the groom side, and that goes to the bride's family. Okay. And the reason anthropologists changed it from bride price, because it's not like a highest bidder situation. Typically, bride prices are uniform, meaning that there is just this one set bride price within the community, and then it creates a circulating fund. So unlike a dowry, which goes and it stays with the new couple, and solidifies them in a certain class because it tends to be people of matching wealth, marrying. You get essentially a circulating fund around the community. So you pay a bride price, and that bride price needs to be enough to get that other family the ability to procure another daughter as a wife for their family, and then it goes around like that. So the differences between the dowry and a bride wealth or bride price system is that in dowry systems, you see a lot more income stratification. So there's very rich, there's middle class, there's poor, and you also see you see less divorce and you see monogamy typically. In bride price paying systems, you see more uniformity in wealth. So there's less variation there. And there tends to be higher divorce from what I've read and what they see, nowadays. And a lot of the difference has to do with women's labor value. So what you see historically is that in bride price paying societies, women's labor value was the bulk contribution to agriculture. So they the tools humans were using in order to do agriculture was a lot more primitive. Then the plow comes on board, and in the plow you have this ability to plow a bunch of land, make a lot more calories, make a lot more money. And then things like, private land holdings start to become more important, and you start seeing a differentiation. But it was mostly men that can do the plow because it required a lot of burst strength. You got this giant thing digging into the earth. You got two big cattle over here, and you're trying to keep this thing straight. So women weren't really doing it. So their labor value went down in respect to men. And this led to a further complexity of society, a class stratification, more specialization in different niche type of professions, you can say. Private property mattered a lot more. The transference of private property through the generations meant a lot more. But as you saw this change in the amount of labor value, women now need to be endowed with the dowry in order to match, in order to keep them in league with guys who are up here, and that's how you get this stratification with it. Land in bride price, typically land is not scarce in bride price paying societies because people can only work so much of it, and the land is more so held in corporate. As this starts to change over, you see this historically. You see, Israelites changing from bride price over to dowry. You can see this in the history of marriage contracts, as they're still paying some mohar, but the dowry the woman's bringing in dwarfs that by a lot. And we have that. We have all that stuff. And then, so it really much is in league with how society developed, pretty much. So I know that was a long answer, but that is what those are. And that lasts all the way down from bride price specifically in the Near East. It's still in sub-Saharan Africa in a lot of places because they didn't really get the plow. But what you see is in ancient Athens, they're doing a dowry system. And we know ancient Athens is fairly sophisticated compared to the rest of the surrounding bride price paying societies. And they would almost look at them as more barbaric or something. But this is where you get these high works of philosophy and geometry and music and all these things that we have from then on. And there's been this unbroken dowry, sort of going from there to the Romans. And then as they start to, spread into Germania, then the dowry starts to take over there as they start to, change society there, and it becomes more sophisticated. Then you get, Germany doing dowry. You get France doing dowry. France had dowry until the laws were there until the mid 60s is when they got rid of them. Italy, I believe it was in the 70s when they abolished their dowry laws. Greece was in 83, I believe. Spain was 81. So as you start to see industrialization, you start to see feminism, you start to see the change in labor value between men and women and what people are doing.
Do you think it started with industrialization? Because I was wondering about that. Go ahead.
Think, so the dowry system was still alive and well in a lot of places, and that is one major factor, or you can say modernization, but really industrialization too, because England is one of the first to modernize, you can say. And that's pretty much the first place where it started to fall out of favor, because in the early parts of modernization, people can make a lot of money and they can finance things a lot easier. So I don't want to say it's just modernization, because it's also the rise of romantic love. I would put that there. And for a long time, that was not something that happened within marriage. It was happening outside of marriage. And only a very small amount of people can even afford to really indulge in that. As
Yeah.
time goes on, you get the printing press, you get these tales of, romantic chivalry starting to become more popular. It's still very hard to have a marriage just based off of, have a love marriage, or a marriage based off of passion instead of reason. And then as we get into industrialization and modernization and all these kinds of things, we start to see great wealth. We start to see different forms of media, and the culture starts to change. Suddenly in England, they're not saving dowries for their daughters anymore. Now it starts to be like, well, as a man, you shouldn't even, ask for a dowry. But meanwhile, over in France, they're still doing their dowry, and their marriages are turning out fine. And you have newspaper clippings of English writers comparing their system to the French system and thinking, should we, bring back the dowry for us or not? And then, the US had some history with dowries as well, for a long time. But, pretty soon after independence, that started to go away, even though there were still plenty of people doing it. But I think that really was only made possible because of a huge boom in wealth, basically. And then, as you get into that, and you get into World War II, and then there's feminism as well, what was called the women's movement. I have a newspaper article on that, from about 100 years ago, and it's called the Dowerless Girls. And it's talking about how you could say it's written kind of by a feminist. It's almost like a propaganda piece. It's talking about, well, if you're not going to give us dowries, then you should at least let your daughters get educated, because if we end up as spinsters, then we want to be able to take care of ourselves. So you get all this stuff, and then as it comes in more recently, then there starts to be more of a harshness against it, and they're doing everything they can to get rid of dowry laws. I have an article from uh 1970s from Italy, and it's talking about how once they allowed divorce there, because there was no divorce. I mean, there was divorce prior in European history from, Roman times and all that, but then when Christianity was really managing things there, it was just annulments. So that's what they
Yeah.
had to deal with. But then in the 70s, when Italy finally allowed divorce, then suddenly it was like, what do we do about these old dowry laws that used to be here? And then it became this whole thing where, oh, the dowry is something that puts these unfair expectations on women. And then you see a lot of this stuff about like dowry violence in India and stuff like that, and all these kinds of things. But it's spoken of in a way to where they want, in my opinion, they want people to have a kind of collective amnesia about it. But it was a system that was there for a long time. And then when you bring it into today, we get our 1950s marriage, which is kind of what was sold on TV. It's a love match. The man brings everything to the marriage. Women don't have to worry about that. I think we can afford that back then, but nowadays, as the cost of living goes up, the cost of housing goes up. We have no fault divorce, which has been a disaster. At least at fault divorce gave you some protection if you were going to be the sole provider of everything.
Yeah.
I think men are having to recalibrate, and we're kind of having to look at this to see what is it that our ancestors were doing, and how can we apply some of that.
Yeah. Yeah. So for the audience, if you guys have any questions or statements that you want to send us, and you have questions for Shah here, feel free to send us a super chat, a rumble rant, or a super chow by going to feedthebadger.com/just the tip to send it, and I'll be sure to read it on stream. I'll do them in a bulk. So it's interesting. We're looking at all of these different phases, and I was thinking it's funny that we're living in a time where conservatives are preserving something that's actually really new. Like they think they're conserving something, but it's not. It's like this illusion, this mythology from the 50s that you were just talking about. And then you have like I guess you could say the feminists or the progressives, and they're railing against that like it's oppression. But there's something much older that seems to have been memory holed by people, right? Like we don't even talk about it. And
Yeah.
it confuses people a lot because I feel like we've been sold this idea of romantic love as the most aspirational like goal for people, and it just doesn't. I mean, it seems like marriages were more stable, more sustainable, more realistic, even because if you, according to what you said, it seemed like people of the higher classes were matched with people of the higher classes, and then the middle classes were matched and the lower classes were matched, and people were relatively satisfied. Like hypergamy wasn't, at least it couldn't like get its claws in, even if it did exist, right?
I often say that dowry is a check on hypergamy.
Yeah.
And it was because there are these things swirling around like romantic love or passion. You know what I mean? And yes, these two people might find each other and they might have some sense of that. But what would happen is eventually when the marriage discussion came around, it would be okay, let's get down to brass tacks here. Um and the families would then start parlaying in that way.
Yeah.
And if the dowry is not commensurate with what would make sense for that family and what they know to be, is going to be the level that their son is at, they would reject the marriage. So there was a level of pragmatism that existed within the system. Then what happened is that all kind of got thrown out the window of a moving car. And it was, well, if you two love each other, then that's all that matters. And the rest will figure itself out. I even have articles from back then of people. It's like people knew once the love match started becoming popular that after a few years you guys would hate each other or start fighting each other. And a lot of it did surround money, and these kinds of things. So it's just it's amazing seeing that stuff in the written word. You know what I mean? And it's absolutely fascinating. It's just fascinating to me. And
Yeah.
a lot of the stuff too, you can see in the marriage contracts. And there were matchmakers who knew what a woman's dowry was or what a man's prospects were. And another myth is like this kind of arranged marriage understanding of like, well, you guys are both kids and your parents figured it out and it's forever going to be that way. But it wasn't really like that. It was more of like, who's available? What does this look like? Let's have a discussion. Can we make this work? There was no prevailing welfare system back then that people just lived off of the teat of that system. It's like, if we're going to get married and do this project together, we need to make sure that we have some kind of plan so we don't do this and then run out of steam and it's just a complete disaster, especially if we're going to
Yeah.
bring kids in the world. Nowadays, it's just like there's all these other mechanisms that, because of the states sort of barging into the private home life of people, to where either there's going to be a welfare system for, there, or there's going to be a sort of forced wealth transfer through child support and the family courts and these kinds of things. So in order to secure good marriages, the bride side is looking for a guy with a good potential income here. The groom side is looking for a well-endowed daughter. And in that negotiation process, both sides are actually being hypergamous. She's trying to get the highest she can get. He's trying to get the most well-endowed he can get. And in that negotiation process, people end up getting the best bargain they can get.
Yeah, but it's realistic. It's like today we have, dating apps, and there is no, families are generally not involved at all in that whole process. Like men and women are just swiping left or right, or they're going to, swap meets or whatever it is they do. I don't even know because I've been married for 10 years, but like whatever it is people do, they do that now. And I think it's they think that this is like the best you can do is working with the system as it is, but I don't think it's designed to work. I think it's broken. And I think that you can just look at the state of marriage, divorce, children, dating in general. So like, do you ever wonder, or do you believe that maybe the concept of romantic love came into play specifically to sabotage like marriages, or do you think there was some like optimistic view of those who were pushing it and then they didn't know what the consequences might be?
I think that to some extent, it did come in when there was opportunity for it to come in. Maybe people felt like they could afford to do that. It was still something that you can say was shamed for a very long time, even up until recently.
Mm,
And seen as a more selfish thing. I think more recently, especially, it's become commercialized, you can say. And definitely encouraged that way. It's a tough question for me to answer because I don't want to say it was on purpose. You know what I mean?
Right.
But it almost seems like women, in a way, use romantic love, especially culturally speaking, and especially when it comes to certain entitlements that they believe that they have, in a way to say this is what it's supposed to be, and that's traditional. And men are kind of shamed into this role or told that they're not masculine. The whole discussion of what masculinity really is, I think, revolves around this because
Oh,
men
absolutely.
men feel like they have to play into this. Otherwise they're shamed if they don't. But deep down, I think men have this gut feeling that something just isn't right, you know. And when I looked at this system, I was like, okay, now I understand. Like this makes complete sense. But I do think it has been used. I don't know. I don't want to say by this or that, but it's like as a culture, I can say it has been used to encourage hypergamy, and for a there's definitely an element of people wanting to indulge in it itself because I would say it's like a sweet sugar, you know what I mean? And you had these more pragmatic style marriages that I would say really built the entire West or all of civilization. And then it's like, okay, well, we're gonna try to allow love into marriage when typically love was an extramarital thing. That was not like I don't want to say dowry style marriages are loveless marriages. There is a love built on respect. There's a familial kind of love. There's a love that comes with the mutual investment. But it wasn't like a romantic save the world. It's just you and I against the world type of thing. It's hey, our
Mm,
families matter and our communities matter. But then what happens is you start to see these changes in family law because pretty much when the US is born, they break away from the Church of England. They want divorce, where you couldn't have divorce before, and then it moves into the state legislature to decide that. But this is how you get our system of at-fault divorce, because and then you start to have reasons like adultery or infidelity or abandonment, and you start to see this whole process evolve. But with at-fault divorce, the reason you needed fault was to decide, okay, what happens to the assets and stuff within the marriage. If she did something that was untoward, then the courts can see that and say, okay, you're the injured party. You're going to keep all the assets, and then you guys are going to get divorced. So, or if he did something bad, even if he's the one coming in with the wealth, then she has a right to go seek a divorce there at the courthouse. And if they can prove that, then she would get the bulk of the assets. Then when you got no fault divorce, it's like they really just took off any restraints they had on hypergamy. It was already now you were allowing hypergamy with the love match to occur. But then it became okay. I know people don't like hearing 50-50, especially conservatives, but they need to understand that in our family codes, it's just a rote 50-50, especially when it comes to divorce. Then we got no fault marriages and all hell, I'd say, really broke loose at that point. And then it became love matches being used against people or in a predatory manner. I do think also, to answer your question a bit, I do think there is an aspect of governments having an incentive to move away from the dowry system. I was reading about Greece, and they were looking to join the EEC, which became the European Union, somewhere there in like the late 70s, early 80s. And I think my suspicion is that there was a lot of conditions in order to sort of receive the economic benefits of joining these larger sort of groups of economic networks was to modernize basically. And they're saying, okay, well, in order to modernize, this is what you need to do. You're going to want women in the labor force because that's going to make it make sense for us to take you into this into this union here. What happened in Greece was that they were looking to abolish the dowry system, and it was the Greek Orthodox Church was the one that they were standing against it, and they had been doing dowry since ancient Athens over there. And then there was a meeting with the justice minister. This isn't a newspaper article from the late 70s talking about this, or early 80s, I believe. And somehow they convinced the church to basically stand down. They never gave their approval to it, but they said, we have no opinion on this, basically.
hmm.
And then they got rid of that, you know what I mean? And it's like, so I do think not I guess what I'm trying to clarify is it's not just an individual basis of people wanting to
Sure.
indulge in this, but I do think there is such a thing as this economic incentive for states in themselves to try to essentially juice the family nest egg, so to speak, and bring it out into the economy for this short-term run-up. And we're
Yeah.
now seeing people that have nothing left and they're trying to figure out what to do.
Yeah, yeah, I think I can see that. It's like these things happen maybe a little organically, maybe mostly organically, but then there are other entities that see that and they're like, "Oh, we can, like let's leverage this to benefit like the state does." Um,
Hmm.
and I could see how that would work out. So, yeah, it seems like what another thing about the dowry that you're pointing out with I guess you could say like it's essentially bringing two families together to like strengthen them by
Hmm.
having them marry, like the son to the daughter or whatever. And you
Yeah.
you get like a larger family as a result of that, which has a ton of benefits to it.
Yeah.
Not
These
just
people,
the yeah, go
these
ahead.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, forgive me.
No, it's okay.
These people own this land over here, you guys own this land. You now have some kind of tie. That's just on a normal peasant landholding level.
Yeah,
On the level of royalty, England is looking at France and Spain is looking at France and France is getting too powerful. Let's marry, a daughter of Spain over to into England and give her a large dowry, and we now have an alliance to hold France back. I mean, so this guy, the king in England could sit here and say, "I want to marry the hottest tavern wench I can find." You know what I'm saying,
yeah,
or whatever. Or he can indulge in romantic love, but it's going to seem irrational to everybody if he chooses to do that instead of marrying, a princess of Spain and then, receiving one entire annual year of income that the crown brings in as dowry, and solidifying this alliance. So, the other myth, I guess, to dispel is that people have no choice in it. That's not entirely, true. It's people do have a choice in it. It's just that they have to face the sort of community ire of there's a good marriage here. Why wouldn't you consider this one, especially when it comes to all these benefits that help the family and also helps put you in a better position?
yeah,
So and typically, it's the incentive that the parents have over the kids is the inheritance, right? Because the daughter's dowry it's what's called the pre-mortem inheritance. Okay. Obviously the son's gonna get one too on the back end. But what they're doing is they're negotiating for their kids' marriages, and the kids are negotiating too. And if the kid, if son or daughter wants to elope with their lover, Romeo and Juliet style, you will get disowned, and to be disowned means you're forfeiting your inheritance. That's going to affect you greatly down the line because if one kid wants to do that, then the parents might say, "Let's put our money into these other two kids or other kid that we have, who's actually has the family's concerns at heart." And it's just, I guess what I'm trying to say is there's this level of pragmatism and consideration that people have to think about. And before the era of class mobility, so with modernization, it was a lot, the sell of college, for instance, it's just like, okay, you could take this relatively poor person and you can put them to college and then they can have a big jump in income. Okay, so with class mobility comes this certain thing where it's now you can make a bunch of income. We have all these apartment buildings that are coming in this mega city that we're building, and that's cheap. We actually don't need to listen to mom and dad so much anymore because we're 18 now. We can pay for everything. Back then, for a long time, it wasn't like that. What I'm
yeah.
basically saying is it's looking like it's kind of becoming like how it used to be as the costs of rent go up, as the cost of housing
Yeah,
goes
people
up.
are staying at home longer and they're
Yeah, that's
yeah,
a whole thing. Half of millennials are at home or whatever. So it's like, okay, as this becomes tougher, maybe it's not really because of, or like, instead of thinking, oh, idealistically it should be like this for everybody, it's like, no, we've had the fruits of modernization. We are now at a point where we're kind of at the tail end of this. um Costs are high, and literally right before this we had to do things a certain way. So what are
yeah.
we going to do now that conditions are changing?
Yeah, and the other thing too is that like if you live in that time, it wasn't. I would guess that in most cases people weren't really against like marrying into this other family because they were probably people you knew very well, you grew up with, you probably felt like strongly for them already because they were in your community and you wanted to bring this together. And so
Yeah.
I don't think it was like there's this usually this come out of these romantic stories where there's a girl and she's betrothed to somebody and she doesn't like them and that person's not a nice guy or whatever. But that's obviously just there to make the other guy seem more appealing. But the truth is,
Yeah.
I think most people were, like if you even when I was growing up, I lived in a neighborhood and I knew everyone that I went to school with because we all lived in the same area. We didn't have the internet. So, there was a pretty good chance that if I didn't move, I was going to probably end up with a girl who lived in the neighborhood. And, but even then, that's still in modernity, more or less.
Mm.
But I think that that's another thing to point out as well. And also, so what I'm also understanding from this is that when you do this, you make your clan larger and you make these connections. This is tied to something that I think that in particular men um, are losing, and this has a lot to do with the sort of fatherlessness that we have going on. A lot of people, especially men, young men, they are losing their connection to their ancestry because of how atomized they are from their own fathers, grandfathers, and so on, right? This is like a big, and people don't want to acknowledge this as a problem because we keep hearing this is essentially patriarchy, right? But I think that this is like a necessary thing. Like when you have all these, for example, there's a lot of men out here now that are, they join radical groups, they, become members of Antifa or some, the KKK or neo Nazis or communists or whatever, because they're looking for a something to belong to. And a lot of them are fatherless, like they come from single mother homes. And if you look at the number of generations of single motherhood, we have like men who are whose fathers didn't have fathers and whose
Mhm.
fathers then didn't have fathers, right? So this is the opposite of the thing that you're talking about, which is normally you would be able to say, like, what your last name means, right? Now, women aren't taking their husband's name.
Oh, I saw a lot of that child support, or the kids have hyphenated names.
Hyphenated names.
Oh
Yeah.
gosh, that always weirded me out.
It is.
Yeah.
It's weird too because they think that they're disconnecting from men, but they're just taking their father's name if they, like if they
Yeah.
hyphenate. So it's still the man's name, but there's this propaganda, this thing that we're fed that like, the attachment to the father is there's something wrong with that. There's something, like toxic about that. And I think that like I don't know if we're gonna get back to that system. But I think that there should be an acknowledgement that it existed. Like this whole concept of dating is new, isn't it? Like in the grand scheme of things.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Like the way we do dating now, I would absolutely agree. You said a lot of things there, and a lot of important salient things, especially about the atomization. I mean, listen, just on a individual level, like me working at child support, reading all the divorce judgment, one of the things that I realized even before all this stuff was that I was watching and understanding how hard it is to build generational wealth in this country. Because if you can't have solid marriages that you can rely on, property transmission between the generations, it just falls like sand through your fingers as soon as the family law courts touch it. I would see, what's supposed to go to the son and daughter there, whether it's for college or their marriages, gets, juiced by the attorneys. You have all these custody issues with fathers, not being able to see their kids unless they pay a lot of money, and that's unfortunate in itself. You don't have parents looking forward to their kids' futures in that way, and then you have a lot of kids born out of wedlock or born from these unions that didn't have much thought put into them. And then people get tired of each other once the love's gone. And that's the sort of unfortunate thing there is what a lot of families understood back then is that love is very fleeting. And
You can
a
build
lot
it.
of our
I think you
marriage
can build it.
therapy. I'm sorry, what
Yeah.
was that?
Oh, I'm sorry for interrupting. I
Well,
said I think that love is not like people think love is this like chemical thing that you just feel and your
yeah,
butterflies and all that. But I think that it's something that you build over
yeah,
time. Like you don't just either happen. It's not one of these things that either happens or it doesn't happen. You work on it. And I
mhm,
think the work that you put into it is where it comes from and it lasts a lot longer. I think Bruce Lee had a saying about that it was like
mm,
it's not like a roaring flame, but it's like an ember, that
yeah.
burns for a long time.
Well,
So
yeah, and I mean, families. I'd like to think over the long course of the generations, figured out that if you build a marriage on on what's essentially, seduction and romantic love. I mean, some element of seduction can be there. Like there is some element of you being attracted to your wife and your wife being attracted to you. I get that. But if it's front and center and nothing else means anything, and you're making your decision based off that, a lot of people knew that that was a recipe for disaster. A lot of our marriage therapy is about when the love dies, you can kind of say, and it's about, oh, what do you do to reignite that spark, so to speak? And it's just about like there's we know we know that kind of I've seen the light switch happen so much, even with just people that I moms and dads I've had to speak with at child support. I can tell that the people who hated each other, what by the time they were talking to me, probably were in love with each other the most, before they ever had to deal with our agency. So it's just it's this thing, and I think even naturally as guys in our current dating sort of scene, I mean, there's just so many relationships that don't work out. There's plenty of heartbreaks, and then you get to a point where you are more pragmatic, I think, with how you choose, or you're gonna be, because you realize love is so unreliable. For a long time, even love stories are always like tragedies, you can say.
Yeah, yeah.
you know
Romeo and Juliet is not actually a romance; it's a tragedy
yeah, and then
because they were stupid kids that thought they could make it work, right? And then they like meet, and the next day, I think they fall in love like instantaneously. And I
yeah.
think it was supposed to be like this is stupid, right?
Yeah,
So,
yeah. Well,
but
and to say your point about kind of the strengthening of families within a community, there's a lot of fraud that can happen. If you don't know who you're marrying into well, most people don't even want to see their potential bride or grooms to be's credit report before they get married. Then they find out down the line
mm,
that they have crushing student loan debt, or have all these weird things that they're bringing into the marriage, or whatever it happens to be. And one of the things, the benefits of it is the family can verify they do know these people well. There's an incentive to there's a word kind of related to hypergamy called endogamy. And endogamy doesn't always mean like marrying within like a specific ethnic group or something. It can mean marrying within a specific economic group. Whatever the factor happens to be, marrying, it means in group versus out group.
mm,
And in the one sense, you can encourage in-group marriages sort of by this means, because it's like, okay, we do want you within the culture, so to speak. Um as far as the family's concerned, or you're going to get disinherited, basically. So there's an incentive to marry within than to marry without. There's still the dowry still plays a big role in marrying without, and if anything, the dowry proves that this family is serious about the marriage, if they know that there's a particular high status family, from an out group, or something that's going to make sense for them based off the situation. You also have people using love, by the way, to do fraud. In Greece, you had these things, these people that they would call proikateris. Proika means dowry in Greek, and it means dowry hunters. So you have
mm.
these kind of early pickup artist types, even in other parts of Europe, that are using these seductive methods to try to get these women. And then if the family wants to save face, then they would do the marriage and give the dowry over to make it a kind of clean thing. So there's all these different different factors for how it works. But one interesting thing is I think it does encourage this kind of sort of community building aspect of it, because that's the families know each other. They know they're not lying about what they have or what they don't have. People know each other there. They own land near each
Yeah.
other. It keeps things very strong within a group. And it's better than, as these things start to break, you see the state get more and more and more powerful. A kind of proto change to this was prior to the church coming in. You had these very strong clan type systems. Then as the church came in, it did make the more of this sort of individual nuclear family style thing, with the church kind of as the glue in between it. Then that kind of lended itself over to becoming even more atomized, with the state, frankly, just being in, you know, having their tentacles in most aspects of our lives at this point. So it's an interesting change.
Yeah. So going back to these old writings about dowry and romantic love stuff, like when this, I guess, like this shift or this change started happening,
Mhm.
um what were women, I don't know if women wrote a lot of articles or pieces or essays on this, but do you know what if there were women that were also concerned about this move? Because I'm sure that there are men who wrote
Oh
about
yeah,
this
there's
concern,
newspaper
but
clippings of women saying that the love match is a bad idea. We should go back to the dowry system. There are different writers back then that are saying
yeah,
we should be endowing our daughters with dowries. We're setting them up for a life of failure. And these are older women who have seen a lot of marriages in their lifetime.
yeah,
And there's one called Dowries for Daughters. Gosh, I'd have to dig through it, but I found that one early on. So there is this kind of the interesting thing about the newspaper articles is you can see there was a very definite period of debates going on because you can see in the search queries that the word, it's being used a lot here, especially in English newspapers around the time they they abolished it and got rid of it. And then after that, just kind of dealing with it. So there were plenty of people who are just like, we don't like this system. But I think by that point, feminism really started pushing against it and modernization. And it just, I think people probably felt like they could finance love. But even in places like Germany, as love started becoming popular and even so much, being kind of hailed in the pulpit, so to speak. If you look, there's a paper I have. It's called Romantic Love or Material Interest, and in this particular city in Germany, in order for people to get married, they had to register their assets at the time of marriage. It was a requirement. So we have all this data about who was getting married to each other. And when you chart out the data, you can see it's pretty much people of like equal assets that are getting
yeah.
married, sometimes with women having more. The bulk of it kind of clusters with women having more because that money's then being used to open up a trade shop or something for the new husband, and then he's working and all that kind of stuff. But what it says in there, what that data shows is that in that time period that the data is taken in, romantic love is being sort of spoken of on a surface level as this beautiful thing. But when you look at the actual marriages, people are negotiating marriages based off of assets, and the purse held all the weight is what it said in there.
So she had
So
to bring
yeah, there
something to
was
the table? Is that what you're saying?
yeah, essentially, right?
She's not the table? She's not the table
Yeah,
in this? Okay.
exactly. I am
Uh,
the table.
yeah. So then, okay. So what did feminism have to do with taking away the dowry? Were there any, because I know that there's a lot to say about that, but I think we have to
Mm.
touch on it a little bit at least. So what was feminism's role or reasoning behind removing the dowry? What was the arguments and why did it get pushed through?
Can I read to you a paper? It's
Of
a quick
course.
3 paragraphs, and I can't show it because I can't share my screen. But
Yeah, it's okay.
it's from an article. I believe it's from 1971, but it or 1970, excuse me. And it says no more dowry. When Italy finally legalized divorce in December 1970, there remained the problem of the dowry. The dowry, or goods and money which the bride brings into a marriage, is firmly established in Italian law. The state civil code contains 32 articles defining the amount, use, and title to the dowry, everything except its disposition in the case of divorce. Arguing that a man could divorce his wife and still keep her dowry, Italy's Senate recently decided to abolish the age old dowry tradition outright. The act was favored, needless to say, by Italy's liberated young women who considered the dowry a price on their heads and a hostage to their fidelity. Under the old laws, you see, adulterous women forfeited all claim to their dowries. So it's stuff like that. Like that sounds fair to me. If you're going to cheat on your husband in a marriage, yes, you're forfeiting the assets now within the marriage, which includes your dowry. But what's going on is they're coming in with a lot of propaganda saying that there's violence against women, or it's unfair to expect that towards women, and it treats women like chattel. And a lot of that isn't true, but this is kind of the narratives being pushed around. And then there's I think I have a few others here. Um, Gosh, there's one from Greece. I'll try to pull it up while we're talking.
Yeah.
And it's talking about how a lot of feminists were pushing to get rid of the dowry, and a lot of it is wrapped up with women wanting full control over their property, basically. And the way the dowry works is the dowry always was the woman's property, but throughout a marriage, a man would have usufruct over the benefits of the dowry, basically. Like if it was land, the harvest coming
He
therefrom
was
would.
building something with it. Like, so he
Yes,
get land,
exactly.
but he would like till the land and
Yes.
turn it into something that produces more value. right?
Yes, exactly. And you couldn't just go and gamble her dowry tomorrow. There were laws protecting against that. And if you were acting in a way that was irresponsible, she can get her dowry back and either, keep it, under her own decisions or put it under the decisions of her brother or father or something like that.
Yeah.
Um, but what ends up happening, I have another paper here. Oh no, that's the same one. Sorry, I was trying to find one. There's another paper I have. It was in the New York Times. Um, it's from the 70s. It's around the same time. And what happens in that paper is it describes how the communists and the feminists were working together in order to get this dowry abolished. So what we read there about 1970 Italy, when they finally got rid of this stuff, it was a result of like the alliance of feminists and
Feminists and communists? Ah,
at least in that
wow.
country, coming
Didn't
together.
see that coming.
Yeah.
But
uh, I
so
have one from Greece here.
okay.
This is pretty long, so I'll try to find the sort of feminist aspect of it. It says persistence of the dowry. So this is a quote. So I'm going to read to you about 5 or 6 paragraphs if you don't mind me doing that, but it'll show you the feminist perspective. But I want to start off with the church. It
Sure.
says the strongest opposition to change had come from the Greek Orthodox Church, but after a meeting this week between the governing Holy Synod and the Justice Minister, the church announced that it was quote unquote not interested if the dowry was abolished or not. It was not clear why the church changed its position. I would have loved to be a fly in that meeting. The dowry originated in ancient times as a continuation by the woman as a contribution by the woman to the family. At the time, a wife was not expected to work outside the home, but she was expected to take care of the home and children. A man who expected his wife to work outside the home was seen as incapable of caring for the family. Negotiated marriages have often had the dowry as a key feature, with real estate or other valuables offered to attract a quote unquote good husband. The need was accentuated by social pressures that stigmatized a woman who remains unmarried. Now, here's where the feminism comes in. And this is a quote. Persistence of the dowry has proved socially harmful and an international embarrassment for the country, according to Aliko Pulu, a deputy dean of the Athens School of Political Science and leader of a feminist group pushing for change. It humiliates women, this is her quote, makes them an object of bargaining and marriage and economic transaction, and in fact also humiliates men by rendering them sort of purchased husbands, she said. So they're the ones that are making this system seem like it's just about buying and selling meat.
It's turning into this cold transaction. But they're
Yeah.
also kind of boiling it. They're using, I think, okay, like stay with me.
Mhm.
I think that they're using the concept of love match or like, love as romantic love as the baseline or the basis, the framework
Yeah.
to turn this to like shame the dowry system as cold and unloving by saying, oh, you're just treating women like a bargaining, chip or whatever,
Yeah.
and the
Where's the
men.
love?
But they have to lean on romantic love to do that, which
Yes.
is like what they're doing, right? That's
Yeah.
what it looks
And
like to me.
and if I can read this next paragraph, this gives you an
Yeah.
idea of what the promise was. Because there was kind of a promise or a sort of deal that was being made. It says Mrs. Maragopulo said dowries had become outdated since most Greek women now work, have similar educational opportunities as men, and can generate similar incomes. Do you see what the promise is
Uh,
there? The promise is that if we got rid of the dowry system, then they would be contributing to the household finances. But they really haven't been
women would
doing
enter
that.
what was about women were entering the workforce then
Entering the workforce and
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 becoming
educational
taxpayers.
opportunities. Yeah, so it says, I'll read another paragraph. It says the report by the Social Research Center said dowry survived through the ages largely because of tradition. Okay, is that bad? Real tradition.
Well,
And this,
but when
yeah,
they say tradition, they do mean
yeah,
it in a pejorative
whatever
way.
their
But
propaganda
yeah,
is.
that's like
Yeah.
actual tradition, not what people today call tradition. But go on.
Exactly. And the support of a large portion of the population that was over 65 and more inclined to respect tradition. So that the older population was aging out, but they still said, no, keep the traditions. And then you have feminism coming in. It found that the practice had been shaken by workers who returned from industrial centers like the United States and Western Europe with more financial security and less dependency on the dowry. So, as college was coming in too, people were sending their kids over to a place like England to be educated, or these modernized places to then come back. And then by that time, they'd be kind of educated into not really being with this system anymore. Um, which is kind of unfortunate there. So that's where the propaganda comes in, and then it's like you can imagine you get the TV, you get the movies, and you get all this kind of stuff, and it's just like oh my gosh, and people think everybody in the past were just these, I don't know, that they just didn't know what they were doing,
Yeah,
but
they
they're
were
really just taking in
backwards
from
and
the
stupid. It was
propaganda.
like, yeah, it was basically like the idea of the time we live in now is the most enlightened, the most intelligent, the most, forward thinking, and that everyone before that was primitive, backwards, sexist, racist, xenophobic,
Exactly.
etc. And a lot of that came, from our media, but I think that the seeds of that were probably being planted like way before that. Um,
Sorry.
Go
I know you
ahead.
got that. I just want to let you know I have one more I want to read to you
Yeah, go
if
ahead.
you
Go
got
ahead.
time. So this one's from 1933 from the Aberdeen Press, and it says off the dot. The dot is another word, or the dot for the dowry. The French usually call it that. The old word dowry is seldom heard nowadays, at least in this country. Although with the French and the Jews, it still seems still as essential to a marriage as the bride. The French were doing dowries, and they were very serious about it. These are the people that gave us the city of love, by the way, for a long time, way further than England. A greater chivalry holds that the bride herself is gift enough. So there's a direct tie there in that article of how
The
romantic
table.
chivalry, the table. That's it. That's from
That's
100
the
years ago,
table.
and it's
Yeah.
saying we are the table. Uh, but if it does happen that she quote unquote has money, as the idiom now puts it, bridegrooms are not expected to object. Dowry was a romantic word, means tied up securely. We hope under the Married Women's Property Act. And I think that's really what undid coverture in England was the Women's Property Act, because it gave them more control over it. It's purely prosaic. But the words, I'll have to double check that, but the word still survives in the civil service. For one thing, as one would expect in that atmosphere of hallowed antiquity where women employees on marriage receive their dowry. So you had women that were working, and they would have these contracts basically of when you complete the contract, especially if you're from a poorer background, women would work to save up their dowries. And then once they got the dowry, you could now be married, and then they could focus on home life. It survived until yesterday, too, and the National Union of Distributive Workers, but is now no more. The trade union has decided against the giving of dowries to members who become brides on two very sound and up-to-date grounds. The first, that since women claim equality with men who have no dowry, they should have it in this. And the second, even more conclusive, that there is no money to pay them. And at last, we suggest is probably the main reason why dowries have dropped out of custom in this poverty-stricken world. So the important part there is that this particular work union or whatever is saying, okay, we're not giving the dowries to the women or having these deals anymore for them because women are saying we're equal to men. So they're wanting the same deal or whatever. And then so it's like if they're equal to men and they're making incomes, then they should be figuring out their marriage that way. But somehow we went from let's abandon the dowry system to women working. Therefore, since women make money too, then that's okay, all the way down to tradcons who are just like women should not have to think about money at all. That's a man's job. But it's like when you look in the past, families worked so hard. Sometimes the brother's marriage would be delayed just so they can save up for the sister's dowry. The
Yeah.
sister herself would be working. In this is from Bride Wealth
Yeah,
and
everybody
Dowry.
worked all through
Yeah.
history. Like this whole
Yeah.
thing about the stay-at-home
Yeah.
wife and mother is a very recent invention, and
It's a recent
it's held. I
thing.
think it's held up by this. It's almost like a kind of virtue signaling to be
Mhm.
like a man that says, "My wife doesn't have to work,"
Oh
right?
yeah, it's like an ornament.
Yeah,
Like yeah.
exactly. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
That's why my
And
wife works. God damn it!
well,
Like,
yeah, but
I'm kidding.
it's
I'm joking.
it,
She does though.
oh yeah, that's good. That's a blessing. And it, it it wasn't something that was strange to the past, but they made it into this thing, which I think it feeds into something that I like to call like the sort of Barbie archetype.
Yeah.
There's another, this is from Bride Wealth and Dowry. It's just a quick thing, but it says the propensity of bride wealth systems to lead to male migration into the towns has an interesting corollary in dowry systems, where considerations of status and honor dictate that a woman has to acquire a certain measure of property before she can get married. The opposite kind of migration may result. In many parts of Europe, young women moved into the households of other people in order to become domestic servants until the time for their marriage came along. And they're doing that in order to save for their dowry, and then once they hit that minimum amount, now you can get married, and you can begin a domestic life that way. So it's a fascinating history, and all this stuff has been largely almost successfully swept under the rug by feminists and even tradcons alike, or they must really have a collective amnesia or something. And
Yeah, I don't think I
yeah.
don't think tradcons want to know. Like, they've not bothered to look into it, in my opinion. They probably,
Mm.
I'm gonna guess that they picked up their framework for what a marriage looks like from the boomers. And I
Yeah.
think that yeah, because I think the boomers, they had a big effect on this shift away from the dowry, just considering the timing and everything, to the system where we're living under now, which is just like a completely lopsided mess that
Mm.
just leads to, like, because like the reason why I say the tradcons are like, they don't they're just ignorant of the history, is like, at best, although they didn't really think it was worth looking into. They only look as far back as like the 1960s
Yeah,
and 50s.
exactly. And
So
they
that's as
and,
far back as they look, and they say, well, my parents or my grandparents did fine,
well,
and it's like, but yeah, but like,
and
that's
Matt Walsh will, like, somebody like Matt Walsh, he said it recently. He will say, going all the way back to time immemorial, like somehow that gets pushed back into what it always was. And but it's mind-boggling to me that they just haven't even looked at it. I have another couple sentences here. This is from a book called Marriage Bargain from 1985, and this is written by a woman who's frankly a feminist, but I like to just read whatever I can find to see what's in there.
yeah,
And she's
yeah.
talking about different articles from, the Sicilian peasantry in the 19th century, imperial German bourgeoisie, Greek workers and farmers. And she's talking about these articles that are going to be presented in this book, which features all the articles. And she says the articles illuminate the ways in which families protected their lineage and property, endeavoring to maintain or enhance their class status by matching a quote unquote promising young man of appropriate status and good economic prospects with a financially well endowed young woman.
Hmm.
They underline the controls, particularly arranged marriages and the threat of disinheritance. The noble bourgeois and propertied peasant families exerted over their daughters and sons to ensure the continuity of existing social relations. Also, they detail the broader economic and social structures within which young women married and to the degree to which the institution of dowry structured courtship and marriage. But what you hear from these tradcons is about preserving a way of life and this and the culture's disintegrating and all these things. But you have to understand how families did this, how they kept this train moving.
Yeah.
And if you don't want to accept that, it's not going to work, So there's this. I really believe there's a fundamental just disconnect and
Hmm.
misunderstanding. It almost seems purposeful. I'd hate to say that, but they've sort of gotten the wool pulled over their eyes, at least, from the feminists and all these kinds of
Yeah,
things.
it could be purposeful, but yeah, I mean, guess if I'm being charitable, I'd say it's just ignorance, if I'm being
Yeah.
charitable. Uh, but we can't really know for sure. So someone asked,
Mhm.
why you think the communists were interested in getting rid of the dowry, since you said that they got involved. I think I
Mm.
know, but do you know if
Yeah.
there's anything that was said about that, or if it was like, if there's a theory about why the communists were getting?
Yeah,
I mean,
I just
yeah,
have
go ahead.
some of the stuff I've read, so, like, I haven't seen, like, I wish I can find, like, an academic thing that digs deep into it. So I only have kind of what I've read and my suspicions. The entire dowry system and system of marriage transaction revolves around this idea of property ownership, and property transmission. So if you believe in private property, and the right to private property based off of, your labors, frankly, then the ability to transmit the property and pass the sort of torch, so to speak, requires a system like this, I think, to do it most efficiently.
Yeah.
When it comes to communists, their view of property is, let's say, it's different. You know what I mean?
That's putting
uh,
it mildly, yes.
yeah, and also with feminists too. Feminists have this sense of entitlement that sort of meshes into a welfare system, right? And this idea of a
Mhm.
welfare system, I guess you could say socialism, is not too far off from the government sort of controlling all property and redistributing wealth as it sees fit. So and you look in China, so it's like where there is a communist society, these systems tend to go away or get really broken because it's like, well, the government's supposed to provide the home, not the bride's family, or all these kinds of things.
Well,
So
communists also wanna live in a classless society, so, like, the thing
Yes.
is the dowry system,
It's class-based.
it's fair, like it works
Yeah.
for people of all levels because they're
Yeah.
sort of like matching, right?
Yes.
And communists say, well, there shouldn't be levels at all, so that they have to like take it apart. And one of the best ways to do that is to destroy families
Yeah.
by eliminating like that connection. So it's not just like getting rid of fathers, but and that's where they're at now.
It's
But
juicing
like
the
that
nest egg.
inevitably leads to a destruction of the entire
The
line,
community.
like from
Yeah.
what is it the Chinese call filial piety, right?
Yeah.
That like familial piety, like I
Yeah.
am my father's, son and his
Mhm.
father before him,
Yeah.
that kind of
Oh,
thing.
yeah. Well, yeah,
So,
because there's more dependence on the state, and it's like the state
mhm.
kind of grows in on itself and wants that. The feminists want the state transfer of wealth to women because they say that that's the equality that they deserve. Um, and then you have the state coming in and taking what families used to save for themselves and for their care and saying, okay, like we have Social Security, for instance, we all pay out of our checks into Social Security. If you look into these older marriage contracts, sometimes it wasn't just about the two people. It's also discussing what's going to happen with the parents. And okay, the bride's parents are giving this land as dowry, but they're going to have usufruct on to be able to live on the land. And the son is responsible for providing them with, you know, 3 new tunics a year and whatever food or whatever it happens to be from what the farm generates, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So elder care and all that stuff kind of goes in, and it's very important. That stuff starts to get subsumed by the state, and so now we're paying taxes into that. So it's harder to then save money to put into something like this, and instead of having reliance on the community and on your family, it's about the state saying have reliance on us, and then on the back end you have this feminist wealth transfer through family law. And it's just people just can't hold families together because the environment we've created it's just not conducive for strong family building. I hate to say that, and I want to be wrong about that, but there's just these other avenues of control that people can take advantage of.
For sure. Yeah. About the Greek Orthodox Church, I
Uh-huh.
can probably find out maybe because I know some Orthodox priests.
Oh.
Um, and so like I could they and Orthodoxy is it's there's a lot of like let's say reverence for history because
Mhm.
it is one of the oldest churches, so
Yeah.
like to them like 300 years ago was like yesterday, like they keep track of like everything. So I might be able to find out like what the reasoning was. My suspicion is that it might have something to do with what is it, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, like basically staying out of like the
Oh,
state's involvement.
I've heard that with
And
Catholics, I
yet
think.
like within the church, marriage is not a legal thing, it's a sacrament, so it is a holy sacrament. And the church I go to, people get married all the time, and
Mhm.
like of course they do the paperwork because you're supposed to, but that's
Yeah.
not like that's not for them what's important, right? So
Yeah,
I
yeah,
would
and
say
I
I could probably try to find out something about that.
that would be fascinating. I would love to learn more about that because when I came across that in the newspaper, I found that fascinating, and it did make sense that the church I mean, that the church would stand up against that. I tried to look more up about it. I just couldn't find primary sources. One thing I
Yeah.
found seemed to indicate that there were differing opinions amongst the church fathers there, and that it had to do with being concerned about. See, I don't know if it's just feminist revision stuff or not, or about women's property. I
Oh
really
yeah,
don't
sure.
know.
The feminists could be just misrepresenting for
Yeah,
sure.
my suspicion about that is that Greece wanted to join the EEC. There were a lot of short-term economic benefits to be made if that happened, so they kind of negotiated them to stand down, so to speak, so that they can avail themselves of this new system. That's my sort of tinfoil hat guess. I think there is maybe some story about maybe changes in Christian thinking that might have to do with some of this, like because France was doing dowries for a long time. Same with Spain. Same with and I Italy too. And I think those are majority Catholic. So that may like it's giving me a clue that there may have been some differences in opinions there. And then you have your
Mhm.
Protestant Reformation alongside a lot of this. The printing press, not only did it make tales of romantic chivalry, but we had different pamphlets and stuff that got that whole Reformation stuff going along. And
Yeah.
then I think you start to see this change and maybe that strain of Christianity that views the spirituality around marriage different. The way I kind of see the folks in the past looking at it as there is a spiritual component to marriage, but that is in balance with the material component, the tangible aspect of marriage, which the dowry. So it's like once you figured out a dowry, once you figured out a marriage bargain or negotiation, then you go to the church and get that, spiritually certified there, sanctified, whatever word you want to use. And that became a way of doing things, But then it became like tradcons nowadays sell it as like the spiritual aspect is the most important aspect. But I really believe both aspects of that are important. I
Yeah,
acknowledge
for
and
sure.
I respect that there is a spiritual aspect, and I think that's an important thing. And I think it's great that people see it that way. But I think it's a mistake to neglect the very real material realities that go along with something like marriage and creating a family. And we live in a society that values private property. I think we do. I hope we do. We live in a
For now.
society with class stratification,
Yeah.
and things like inheritance that I think ideally families do want to leave stuff to their kids. But it's there's so many things that change. There's the gold. Sorry, I was looking at this on this. There's the technology aspect of it. This is what gets me into this conversation of gold pill is the X factor for me is always technology and how far we've come. And it's just like, can we go back? I don't know if we can go back. I don't know if our psyche is fundamentally changed, or if we can only try to learn from this old system and try to see how do we apply it going forward, on an individual or even collective level of how do we negotiate marriages going forward? When does it make sense? You know what I mean? To pull the
Yeah.
trigger on it, so to speak.
Yeah. Well, this has been a really great conversation. We're running out of time, but
Yeah. No
I
worries.
don't
That
know if
works out for
there's
me. But if there's questions in the chat, like I can stay for longer, just try to address them if you need to do that. So
all
no
right.
worries.
Let me see. Just looking to see if anybody has a question that I like. We should call them Hollycons because their ideas of traditionalism come from 50s Hollywood and
I
advertising.
like that
Yeah.
one.
Yeah, that's basically what it is. It's not really reality.
Yeah, let's remove tradition
It's a
from
LARP.
it, at
Oh,
least.
so just so like the engagement ring.
Uh-huh.
What is that? I saw your video on it.
Mhm.
I decided to watch some of your videos just to like,
Yeah.
get a sense of like what it is you like to talk about.
Mhm.
And it was all around that engagement ring photo
Yeah.
that one tradcon chick shared, and all of the essentially intersexual competition that came out of that, with all
Yeah.
these women attacking each other and over it. Uh, I don't think that's trad. I'm just
Yeah.
saying, I don't think it is, but
I I thought
what
it was a sorry, go on.
yeah, no, I was just gonna say, like, is there a relationship between this idea of the engagement ring, that which seems to be a product of like the romantic love
Mhm.
courtship stuff,
Yeah.
but is there some relationship to that and the dowry, like historically?
Yeah, the dowry specifically, not really. There is something called the morning gift. And this was kind of in that transition period of like these sort of German lands as they're changing, as the church sort of after the Romans move in, but then as the church starts to move in there, and they're changing the way marriage is done, basically, and the dowry system is starting to take over. They did have something called the morning gift, and a lot of that was kind of given, the day after, I guess you can say, consummation or whatever. I do know that there was like rings do go back quite a ways, but it's not like a dowry proper in the sense, it's
Mhm.
something
Symbolic?
it yeah, it was more symbolic, you can say. And then it really gets taken over with, the diamond industry, and that it should be 3 months of a man's salary or something like that. Then it really goes that way. So I know there is a little bit more history that just isn't, the diamond industry back there,
Yeah.
but it's not like a true marriage transaction or something like that. It's not a bride price because it doesn't go to her family. It goes on her finger. And it's not a dowry in a sense because, well, it's not coming from her family, first of all, to be her. So it really is different from what those transactions represent, to begin with.
Yeah.
Yeah, but there is a history around it. I don't have it off the top of my head. I have read a little bit about it. Some people will say it still represents a kind of nod to the bride price or the mohar, which was the man giving, the amount over. But since it doesn't go to her family and it's not enough for that family to procure another daughter, for them, I don't
Yeah.
see it as a bride price. It's more just a kind of symbolic exchange, between the two
Yeah, yeah,
people.
I think it's lost its
Yeah. The
meaning.
the funny part about the Twitter storm was, uh there's this aspect of, I guess, showing off. I don't even know if it's fair to say that, but it's like this idea of, well, it's a status signal, or it's my change in status. But typically, that's what the wedding is for. And there is this idea of status signaling. I mean, sometimes you'd present the dowry so everybody can see, and then that would firmly say, okay, this family, it's not just about the wedding and the status change, but it's status signaling the entire family to say, hey, this family is here on the sort of status hierarchy. Somebody who wants to marry into that family, you can expect to pay a dowry commensurate on what you're seeing in front of you. So I can see how, like, an engagement ring sort of becomes this kind of quasi status signal that people kind of like to show off how.
Yeah, the bigger
I
the
think
ring,
Cristiano
then the
Ronaldo just
bigger
got
the
married, or he
yeah.
just got engaged, and her diamond was like gigantic.
Well, that's what she said. What did she say? I won, and that was like it. And there was a picture of
Yes.
her hand with the ring, and we don't
Yeah.
know what that means, who she
Yeah.
married. The man's not pictured.
Exactly. It
Right,
was
yeah.
just. It was like
It's just this
Twitter. It
flex
was
on the
made for
other women
Twitter.
online. That's all it is. Um,
Yeah.
but okay, so one more thing I wanted to say, because I just thought about
Mhm.
this. Uh, one of the things that I think we lost as a result of all that we've been talking about, when
Mm.
you are bringing a family together through marriage, through this
Mm.
dowry system, there has to be, like, obviously an established relationship between the two clans, I guess, or there usually is. And there has to be, because you said that there are people who, use fraud, or they exploit this in some
Mm.
way. So what you want is to have, like, trust between them. So I
Mhm.
think that one of the things that gets lost by that is, first of all, the value that we put, or the amount of value we put in trust itself as, like, an
Mm.
idea, and also honor. Because I
Yeah.
think that honor is a thing that we people express or use, like, believe in, but it's not something that we value very highly these days. At least I
Yeah.
don't think so. And
Yeah.
I think that that's something that men in particular, like, I think they care about that a lot. You know,
Yeah, it's they absolutely do, and there is
like,
the
your
word honor.
reputation matters, right? Your reputation, your
Yeah.
word, things like
Your
that.
your values and all that.
Hmm.
I mean, it's one thing to proclaim that you have a certain value system, and that you live by it. But the dowry is the tangible proof that you guys have been doing this family project, and actually been living by those values. So it's not just about the exchange of money, but it's saying, here, we're serious about this. We're serious
Yeah,
about how we represent ourselves, and what we do. And these are the, expectations that come with that. I think honor is something that men, or at least the space, discusses, that I think tradcons maybe even want to discuss as a phenomenon, or is that something we should care about, because they're saying, hey, we want you to live by a value system, and it's dishonorable not to, if you proclaim to have these values. um but it's important, beyond that, but to actually have these tangible things behind it, that sort of declare this is how it is.
yeah,
When it comes to dowries too, there is a lot of honor there, in a way, because you might have whole families contributing to somebody in the family is getting married. They may not be your direct, they might be your extended relative, maybe a cousin or something, or a niece, basically. And you might send money over that way to put in on her marriage, so that the whole family has come together and contributed something, and they put it in on this marriage. So these other people that you're getting married to, they're going to understand that, hey, this entire family has put in on this. You know what I mean? And
yeah.
so it's
Like,
not a joke to
we
not
were
take
talking
this
about Italy.
seriously.
Yeah, we were talking about Italy, and I'm
Mhm.
thinking about Italians, the ones I know,
Mm.
they're like in things like honor and family, obviously. And I'm not making a mafia joke, but, like, honor and family is a big deal. And I
Oh,
think that,
yeah.
that's probably why they held on to it for so long.
I
So,
agree with you.
I mean, I think it's inherently masculine too, just in my opinion. But anyway, I don't know. Do you have any final thoughts? We got to wrap it up, unfortunately, but this has been a really good
Yeah.
conversation. I hope you'll come back on
Oh,
sometime.
absolutely. No, thanks for having me. I'm sorry about that scheduling snafu earlier. And I no, I just, what I'd like to see is just more folks talking about it, and just, understanding what it was. Um, you know, Me personally, I don't know if we can go back in time and completely revive the system as it once was. I don't believe that. I do think romantic love has changed the Western psyche over hundreds of years to some degree. And I don't think that we shouldn't have love in marriages. I just think to some extent we have to understand the priority of all these things when we're making these decisions. Should romantic love be front and center? Probably not. Could it be some small part? Maybe, but we have to have these practical considerations. And it
Yeah.
doesn't mean that you're less of a man or you're not masculine. Masculinity back then, it wasn't viewed that way. Men did expect dowries. And if you didn't, even the bride's father would think there was something wrong with you. If you said, I've seen that written in here in several places.
Mhm.
But, you know, so it's important to not be captured by this idea of masculinity that kind of big media is selling you.
For
And
sure.
it's sometimes you know, not sometimes, but all the time it's better to negotiate things up front and see what you're getting into. Because I don't want people to be afraid of marriage. I don't want to say you should never be married. This whole conversation that we're having and that we've been looking into, when I look at red pill stuff, I kind of have this thing where I say red pill helps guys maximize short term um, relations with women. So yeah, you're having trouble dating women or whatever, and you understand these techniques to get them attracted to you. But a lot of the red pill people come into a problem when it comes to what do we do about marriage and this family creation thing now. And that's where they've struggled for a long time. And I believe that the answer to that lies in all of this history right here,
Yeah.
because negotiating a short-term relation versus a long-term sustained family are two different things that require two different, you know, modes of thought.
100%. I think the red pill guys are looking for the short term solutions, and that's why they're you know, like the whatever podcast.
Mm.
Those guys they're unequipped to handle the real like problems of marriage and family and
Yes.
children and parenthood. Because it's going to require a lot of hard work, and that's
Yeah.
why we do what we do. We you know, and we're not the only ones, but I think that, yeah, I mean, like, you know, no matter what you think about the modern world, a lot of men want to get married and they want to have kids. And so we
Mhm.
should try to make that, you know, like possible for them, you
Yeah,
know? So,
exactly. They're
yeah,
that's exactly what it is. So I've really been enjoying, you know, learning about this and having discussions about it. And again, thanks for having me on. And you know, maybe we could do it again sometime.
yeah, definitely. We'll do it again sometime. Maybe Allison will join us or something.
Mhm. Cool.
Okay, so thanks guys for coming on the show. And thank you so much, Shah, for joining me and sharing your insights. If you guys want to check him out, I got all of your links, your YouTube channel, your X, your email address. Do you have like a Substack or something, or am I thinking of somebody else?
No, I don't. No
Oh, okay,
Substack for
okay.
me. It's
There was
just
a
Twitter and
guy I had
YouTube
on
mainly.
that had a Substack that was pretty good
Got
too,
it.
where he was looking at the spending of like UN women and stuff like that. But
Oh, that sounds
anyway,
fascinating. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, very good stuff. Okay, so anyway, thanks guys for coming on the show. If you guys like this video, please hit like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed, hit the bell for notifications, leave me a comment, let me know what you guys think about what we discussed on the show today, and please, please, please share this video because sharing is caring. Thank you guys so much for coming on today's episode of the Fireside Chat, and we'll talk to you all in the next one.
Men's rights activists are machines, dude. Okay? They are literal machines. They are talking point machines. They are impossible to fucking deal with, especially if you have like a couple dudes who have good memory on top of that too. Holy shit, you're fucked.